I'm kind of surprised because this movie's really gotten a lot more conversation than I would have expected out of kind of a generic Blumhouse movie. I'm talking about Woman in the Yard, which has become the most controversial horror movie of the year, I would say. When the trailers came out, I thought it looked kind of interesting on a visual level. I thought the image of the Woman in the Yard was pretty, cool looking, striking, but I've been let down by a lot of Blumhouse trailers where they introduce a basic concept. It looks kind of cool. You kind of think like, oh, this could be kind of an interesting and neat little horror movie, and then it becomes a generic piece of shit. And that was where a lot of my skepticism, even my decision to initially not see it, was coming from. My worry that it was going to be just another generic Blumhouse movie. They've just been on a pretty horrific losing streak, at least the last year, I would say, for sure. But a lot of the conversation surrounding this seemed pretty different, I would say, even though it wasn't that it was overwhelmingly positive. It was just that it was very different than, say, Imaginary, where it's like, fuck that movie, it sucked. But that was the whole catch, they have fooled me many times with what seems like a cool enough concept. They hook me with a good trailer, and then I'm ultimately let down by the end. And like I said with last year, especially Imaginary and Night Swim, those movies kicked me in the nuts. They were just terrible. And because of that, I was so surprised to hear that there was such a conversation surrounding this movie in particular. It was just one of those movies where everybody coming out of it seemingly either loved it or hated it, had a very positive reaction and respected what it was going for, or were kind of even like a little bit disgusted by what it did and what it was going for. Not at all like Imaginary and Night Swim, where those movies just bored you into submission. It seemed like people had actual strong opinions on these movies. And it definitely made me want to go see it for myself and make up my own opinion on it. With movies like this, I kind of try to avoid what exactly people are saying, and I did do that for this movie despite hearing that people did think it was controversial or that people had thoughts on it one way or the other. I overall didn't know exactly what they were talking about or what the subjects were pertaining to that were causing this movie to be so controversial, because I was at that point then like, alright, well, I should check this out and make up my mind for myself. And after seeing it, I definitely see why people had such strong opinions on it. I'm pretty overall meh on the movie, solid 2.5 out of 5 maybe, but I very much see where the reaction is coming from, and why I say that is because I just feel like I have a lot of mixed feelings about what they did and what they went for. I hate to keep harping on Night Swim and Imaginary in particular, but this movie has a lot more artistic value and merit, I think, than movies like those, where those are pretty generic by the numbers, Blumhouse, kind of boring. This one is a slow burn, but it seems like it's actually interested in exploring certain ideas. It's interested in having a distinct artistic flair. I was kind of surprised too to find out that this was the director of Orphan, which I think is one of the most underrated horror movies of the 2000s, which became overall a pretty underrated horror franchise, but that's straying away from the point. With this, it just overall felt like this was interested in telling this story about this family, and it was interested in blurring the lines between what's real and what's not. Although I respect that for its distinct style, I do think that the themes that the movie's tackling, they go for something that a lot of other horror movies I think have done, and have done better. They've handled the subjects better, and just overall presented them in a way that's a lot less distasteful to audiences than the way that this movie does, although I kind of respect how it does it. I know I'm being vague, and I'll get more into my more specific thoughts later, but I'm just trying to give a general impression. Because what I will say about this movie is that it very much goes for the gut in kind of a very unflinching way that I can almost appreciate. Now we're officially getting into spoilers. This is 100% my spoiler thoughts. If you don't want to watch it, if you're not interested, don't. But I am going into spoilers now. And what I'm very much speaking to, which is definitely the most controversial aspect of the movie, is the ending, about the fate of the mother and whether she chooses life or she chooses to take her own life. And that seems to be the aspect which very much divided people depending on their interpretation. What I will tell you is that I pretty much have no doubt in my mind personally that the mother took her own life. I think that so much of the way that they frame her choice, frame everything, the way that she leaves, this fairy tale ending where very surreal things happen, such as the house coming together, they have the mailbox and the name, everything. The dog is just magically alive again. The kids come back. All of that feels like kind of a messed up fantasy. And it is leaving you on this very sobering downward note and kind of masking it, I think, for a lot of reasons. And, like, this is a very tough subject to talk about. The way that the movie presents it is, like I said, very gut-wrenching. A lot of people found it distasteful. I don't know if I found it distasteful, but something about it did rub me the wrong way a little bit. But I will say, I do think that when the woman in the yard was showing her kid's life, ostensibly, them growing up, becoming doctors, living a nice, peaceful life without her, presupposing that she does take her own life, that they live a good life, I think that they're trying to get into the mind of people struggling with this, people who are thinking about doing this, and they're kind of visually presenting it in a way of, people who have this ideation, this is how they feel when they're making this decision. They justify to themselves that their loved ones, their family would be better off without them. And, that's such a tough thing to watch, especially when, you think you're going in for a generic horror movie and they hit you with something like that. That's a lot. But I will say it very much just goes for it, and I kind of appreciate it for that, at the very least, for committing to very adult themes, sticking with them. I'm kind of confused with the painting aspect, because I don't know if that really means much to me. I kind of just interpreted it as a payoff to the little girl's inability to put R's the right way. But overall, I viewed the movie entirely as this allegory for her letting this grief just overcome her, overtake her, and eventually win in the end. And I viewed that fantasy fairy tale ending as just more abstract, not the truth, rather than what the reality was. In my mind, the woman in the black did win at the end of the day, despite the confusing logic of how she works and her being the woman in the yard the entire time. Just at the end of the day, I see it as that overwhelming grief won. And that's a theme that has been tackled in many other horror movies. Off the top of my head, I think of The Babadook, which I think tackled that subject extremely well. And I think that ending was a lot more hopeful because it showed an actual level of overcoming that, and kind of how you need to feed that level of grief from time to time, because it doesn't just go away. This had a very hopeless ending where grief 100% won at the end of the day, in my mind, and she ultimately took her life, which is so sad. It's a really depressing, downer ending. And although the part of me that respects bold endings like that wants to commend it, for some reason it just doesn't sit entirely right with me. And it could be presentation, it could be some of the confusing logistics of the way they're telling the story. It goes to my overall feelings on the entirety of the movie. It's this mixed feeling that I don't know how to interpret some things. I feel very mixed about the things that I do interpret, and overall just some of the slowness surrounding the story didn't feel like it was enough of a payoff for me, whereas I think a lot of other people feel like it tied the knot on a story in such a either extreme or interesting way that it made the movie for them. Overall, like I said, I'm in the middle. I'm in between this love it or hate it situation, so I don't necessarily feel too strongly one way or the other, but it still made for an interesting watch, and I'm glad I did. But those are just my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. How did you interpret the ending? I'm GM Light. Have a good one.